Hi, everyone. My name is Jennifer Hewins, and I'm the Assistant Director for Graduate Admissions. Today, we are joined with two faculty members who are graduate program directors. We have Pete from Furniture Design and Lane from Photo. Thank you both for joining us. And today, this is an open Q&A. The point of this session is to answer questions regarding the portfolio, but generally you can ask any types of questions today to gain insight into the program, the curriculum, how to better your portfolio. There's no wrong questions here, so keep them coming in the Q&A. Most likely somebody has the same type of question as you. To kick us off, though, I do have some icebreaker questions for Pete and Lane. All right. When you're reviewing graduate applications, what makes a portfolio stand out in the right way?
Do you want to start, Pete, or should I?
Go for it, Lane.
Okay, thanks. What makes a portfolio stand out is cohesion. Someone who is really focusing on 1, 2, maybe 3 projects, but it feels like they're really truthfully investigating or interested in a subject, in something. That might not be, of course, a personality or people, but some type of academic or interest that's kind of guiding the practice. And often, honestly, the writing, Jen, that accompanies each image is incredibly instrumental and helpful for me and the team of people who are looking at the applications to understand the context through which we're viewing the images. Contemporary or current work that the student's making is also very important, so that it feels recent or something that they've been working on, and representative of where their mind is right now, where they're kind of going towards, which doesn't necessarily mean it has to have all been made last year, but something that speaks to where they want to come into RISD, what practice they're kind of bringing in to the department.
Yeah, Lane, thanks for taking the first question. Yeah, I would second that. I think from my perspective, evidence of research is really critical. And that might be material research, it might be process related, it might be iterative examples of work that's you're kind of working through at the moment. But I think really kind of showcasing what ideas you're working with and the ways in which you're thinking through those ideas in 3D form is always really helpful. And I'll just put another plug-in for descriptions with the work. There's space for that, and it's really key for the entire committee reviewing to be able to understand what the work is. I think sometimes it might seem more obvious than it is, and it's a good opportunity into your thinking.
That's great. Thank you, Pete. And I'm just going to do a little plug here for, the actual mechanics of Slide Room and the application and the portfolio. I can't stress enough how important it is just to get in there now and start tinkering around with Slide Room, just so you can familiarize yourself with it. I wouldn't wait a week before or the day before the deadline to get in there and start setting up your portfolio. It is during the deadline is right before our winter break. And while we do respond to emails while we're on break, there could be a delay. But as Pete was mentioning, in Slide Room, there's a description section. And in that section, you want to utilize that to the best of its ability. There'll also be a section to put medium, the type of materials you're working with, the dimensions of the piece itself, and any other information you want us to be aware of. So make sure you're utilizing those to your advantage. Also, we see a lot of people who have these curated multi-page PDFs. We don't need to see those bundled up, perfect packages. We don't need a cover page, a table of contents. We've seen some portfolios that have resumes in them. There are opportunities within the application to submit a CV or a resume, so take that out of the portfolio. We just want to see examples of your work in SlideRoom. All right, we'll dive into some of the questions in the Q&A. Pete, these are furniture-specific questions for you. This person has a background in both cabinet making and sculpture. Their earlier work leans towards minimal wood pieces, whereas their recent furniture projects are more conceptual and sculptural. Should they include some of these earlier works or stick to solely showing pieces demonstrating the direction they're hoping to explore in the program?
That's a good question, and it sounds like this is exactly the type of application that we love to see, which is to say that you're coming from a technical foundation and are ready for the time and space to develop more conceptual ideas and to merge those ideas with technique and material. Um, I would say that given the kind of limited scope of, the portfolio, like in terms of how many images, like, you're submitting, I would say focus on the work that you're doing now and really work to kind of, you have these other elements outside of the portfolio, like including the personal statement, where you can describe your background in cabinet making if you feel like it's relevant. But I think that in general, the committee would really like to see what is this work that you're pursuing and the, how might these ideas develop as you enter into a thesis project, which is a really core part of our curriculum. But I say that with the caveat that if you think the cabinet work that you did previously are the more minimal, I think you described it as minimal furniture. If you feel like somehow there are links, like conceptual links between that work and the more kind of you described sculptural work you're doing now, feel free to include that. I mean, it's hard to know without knowing exactly what you're thinking about, but there is some value in seeing a trajectory of ideas. So, hopefully that's helpful.
That's great. Thank you, Pete. Lane, you had mentioned earlier that for photo, you like to see from 1 to 3 projects.
Mhm.
That's a question that we get a lot in admissions. How many projects do people want to see? Is it better to see a ton of different, projects, hone in, as you mentioned, more on the type of work that they want to explore here at RISD? Some other schools they want to see a minimum of 10 projects.
Mhm.
So if you both wanted to go into that a little bit, that'd be great. That'd be helpful.
Absolutely. Our program is in many ways, I mean, it's incredibly technically uh, adept at giving people the skills that they want to have as a photographer. And we do ask for quite a high level of technical craft. However, that being said, what we're really looking for in graduate students is how are you thinking about image making, or how are you conceptually sitting with your images, and where are you sort of putting yourself in the canon of image makers. So that being said, the reason I think it's easier to show that in 3 projects is you can kind of show me how you're thinking through the breadth of a number of images, or taking one idea or kind of delving into one type or one thought process or one subject when you're making those images. So it's more about how are you thinking rather than how can you make an image, or how are you sort of wrestling with the technicality, unless wrestling with the technicality is the component of your intellectual project that you're sort of looking through when you're making your portfolio. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, furniture is not so different in that we are looking, the amount of projects that you include is really dependent on how well the scope of those projects speaks to, again, like what you're thinking about, what's motivating the work, how that situates you within the larger field of, furniture design. So I think or maybe you're more focused on material and process and you're wanting to show that through your portfolio. And maybe that's, many projects, like many iterative projects, or maybe that's, two projects. We're not necessarily looking for a number of projects that have been completed. What a cat.
I know.
Beautiful.
That's
She
a
always photobombs, Zoom bombs.
So I think the quantity is not really our focus. I would say it's the quality of what you're presenting, and I think there's a lot of different ways to show that, as both Jen and Lane mentioned, like having portfolios that are just hyper dense with images is not particularly helpful. It's more helpful for us to be able to really, if you want to show, for example, we have a second year MFA student right now who is a fifth generation carver. And his work is incredible. And he showed all of these like very detailed images of carvings that he's done. And that was really, impactful for the entire committee to understand the level of detail. So it really is at your discretion, but I would say emphasizing the quality of the projects, not the quantity, is really key.
Fantastic. Thank you, Pete. A great question just came in. This person's currently developing a material-driven project where most of the work right now is in testing and refining the process. It may not be fully resolved by the deadline. Is it better to include it as a work in progress through renders, prototypes, and one of two full-scale material studies, or should they only submit projects that are fully finished? And this is a great question because we get this a lot from all the different disciplines.
I'm going to assume that was directed to furniture.
Yeah.
Okay. I would say that I would say that including work that's in process is okay. And I think the way in which you document that work is really helpful. We have an optional, what would you call it, submission within our portfolio, which is a 20-second video that shows a making process, and that's focused on us kind of understanding how, an applicant might approach a material or process. So if you're doing something which, if you're doing some material explorations or experiments, that might be a really good space within the portfolio to include some detail around that process. I think work in process is, again, I think it's totally fine, especially as it might relate to larger kind of research questions you're dealing with or things that you would want to be spending time on while at RISD. So I don't discourage that at all. I would just say make sure that your portfolio has balance, which is to say evidence of an idea through. And then work in progress, again, speaks to what you're doing currently, which I think is really relevant.
Great. Thank you, Pete. Now this is a question for both of you. How do you see the portfolio as a reflection of an applicant's potential as a grad student or an artist?
I think it's a similar sort of question to the ones that we've been answering, in the sense that the ideas that you're interested in pursuing, I think in that space that we were talking about where you can describe the image, it's really wonderful to know, especially in the essay as well, where are you wanting to go with your practice? Why is this moment in time the right moment for you to go to grad school? And why is RISD the right school? Why is our program the right program? Each graduate program is so unique in each school. So there's something very valuable about knowing not just what you want to do as a graduate student, but sort of how you fit or how you'd like to be in conversation and in community with us, I think.
Great. Yeah, definitely spot on.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I also would just say I wouldn't put too much pressure on the relationship between the application and, you know, whether or not you will succeed in the field of art or design. We're dealing with like Slide Room, which is a new platform, which has its own requirements, or maybe it's not a new platform, but it's a digital platform that has its own requirements. We're also asking, asking you all to kind of adhere to our requirements. And, that might not be the way that you choose to kind of work generally. So I would say kind of like just go with the parameters here. Like they're there for a reason, and we're trying to like understand, we're trying to like see your work and understand your points of reference and motivations as best as we can through these limited kind of means.
Perfect. Thanks, Pete. And as they each have mentioned, the statement of purpose is a really important element of the application as well. We reviewed the application holistically here at RISD, so things like the letters of recommendation are really important. The statement of purpose, the portfolio, you'll hear the portfolio is the most important. And, while it's definitely up there, all of these other elements do go into explaining, who you are and what makes you unique as an artist and designer. All right, I have a question for you, Lane. Would you prefer a cohesive photographic series with a unifying theme, or can they include individual images that stand out on their own?
Totally include individual images that stand out on their own. I think it's important to know when you're doing so why that image stands out to you, so that we have context for understanding why it's in the portfolio. But that being said, sort of as to what we were speaking to earlier, um, if every single image in the portfolio is sort of a one-off, understanding how that might be your part of your practice or how that comes together as a whole, because as a sort of as a matter of looking at the portfolios, we do view them as one complete application for a student. So there's an interest in me knowing why each image would be coming from a one-off project or what the conceptual reason for that is. And that could be a lot of different reasons depending on how you explain it or contextualize it. But that's absolutely fine if you have images that you're like, this is something that's demonstrating or illustrating, or I took this and I'm really interested in this component of the photograph.
Perfect. Thank you.
Oh, and within that though, the sequencing is incredibly important as well. How the portfolio sort of develops as we look through the images, because we click through it um, consecutively, and it's, I mean, for those of you who are signing on for photography, the photo book is such a component of both like photography as a discipline, and also it's one of the components of our thesis requirements. So it's exciting and sometimes fun to see how your brains are thinking through how you're putting together this portfolio in time as well.
Great. Thank you, Lane. We'll go back and forth here. Pete, I have a question for furniture. RISD furniture seems to move between craft, function, performance, and sculpture. Where would you say the current center of gravity is right now?
I think that, what would I say? I actually think that that's pretty spot on. I mean, I don't think we intentionally within a graduate cohort look for students who are working in complementary but distinct ways. So, we have I mentioned, just a little bit ago that we have, Carver, he's from Pakistan. He's been, this is like a long-standing family craft heritage. We have another student who's been working primarily with paper and is coming from a much more production-focused background. I mean, every cohort includes students who are very focused on craft or very focused on production or very focused on the way in which furniture performs as sculpture. And I think that is in so many ways what makes a program so interesting is that there's not just one thread. And I think students learn and pick up from each other different points of interest or focus. So I actually wouldn't say that there is a kind of like, I guess if I were to say there were one centering element, it would be that there is a grounding within, you know, uh, kind of material or process, but not necessarily towards any one approach or outcome.
Mhm.
Great. Thank you, Pete. Here is a question from that I think both of you can answer. How does a successful professional career with a desire to come back to university setting to develop further influence in applicants' chances of being chosen?
Is the question, sorry, Jen, is the question about someone who's already had a career within the discipline that they're applying to, or someone who's coming from like a totally different background and coming back to school for something else?
It doesn't say specifically.
Got it.
If this person, if you wanted to clarify in the Q&A, let us know, but
We get both, and we're interested in both. It's often really exciting to have someone who's coming from a totally different place that all of a sudden is, or becomes interested in really diving into image making. Um, we have had students who have come previously as a lawyer who come back to think about image making, and then we have people who have been at Perry Photo who are coming back to get their MFA in photography. So it doesn't increase someone's chances. We also have people who come directly out of or like 1 year out of undergrad, but I find it very exciting or very interesting to understand those switches in life path. And for us, there's also no real median in terms of age in the graduate cohort. We really look for, similar to you, Pete, we look for complementary practices or people who we think would have synergy both in critique and in conversation and in making together as a cohort.
Mhm. Yeah, same. I mean, I think that there are so many different paths that, you know, people take in their creative kind of trajectory. And I would say, in terms of the application, the emphasis on why you're wanting this focused time and why you're wanting it at RISD is really critical because, yeah, I mean, there are people who are switching careers or coming from a different, kind of sector of the creative industry and are wanting to, you know, kind of pivot, and whether that's pivoting to an independent studio practice or pivoting to furniture design specifically as opposed to, for example, like object design or um, or creative direction. We have students who have come from all different facets of the design field, so, and fine arts as well. So I think it really is just understanding why this time would be helpful in your own development.
that's great, Pete. And kind of to build on that a little bit, for people who are coming from either doing a career change, there's a gap in between going to school and their professional work, or they're coming from a completely different background. What's the best way for them to translate their experience into a strong portfolio?
I think it absolutely comes down to both of the essays that we ask for, kind of have room for, both the artist statement and the sort of historical essay that students can include, or potential students can include. Um, that all of those things really do work in concert with each other, where we get to understand both background through CV, through the letters of recommendation. Inside of the portfolio itself, though, in terms of the images that um, people are including, I think that unless it's something that truly contextualizes the work that you have that's around image making, or work that you really want to move towards while you're in your graduate practice, graduate years, that visually doesn't need to be represented. It could be more spoken about in the essays. of how they represent where they're coming from.
Mhm. Yeah, it's, I mean, slightly different in furniture only in that, you know, the idea of understanding that you're able, like that you can execute resolve 3D work is important. But otherwise, I would just second what Lane said. And those essays are such a great opportunity to really alert the committee and bring them into like your kind of like mode of thinking. So I really do just like encourage you all to use those as a real opportunity, not just as a kind of like um I don't know, like don't do a kind of blanket statement. I think like really let us know like what you're thinking and why. Like what are your interests? How do you want to pursue those?
Perfect. Thank you, Pete. All right, back to some more specific questions. For photography, their undergraduate background is not in an artistic practice. And so they're curious what are some avenues to show their material proficiency and practice in their portfolio.
Is this a scenario where they haven't made any images yet? Or because I would say the portfolio is absolutely a place for you to be able to show your image making proficiency or capacity, interest, and the descriptions on the side where you can kind of say like, what camera did I make this with? What was the process through printing? That all gives us a great amount of understanding of how you're working with material. But there's a number of different ways where it doesn't necessarily have to be a photograph, of course, that is driving you towards thinking about an image-based practice. You also might have a background, as this person might be suggesting, that could be in a totally different way of making images. But to know that moving into an image-based process or an image-based practice, which is what we're really offering in the graduate program, how that sort of plays into the images that you want us to take a look at.
Great. Thank you, Lane.
Sure.
So this is just a standard question for both of you. You've touched upon them briefly, but what are some common mistakes and pitfalls you see applicants make in their portfolios?
Too many images on one page. This is like, I fully understand that the amount of space is like limited and you want to show, or an applicant wants to show how many skill sets they have, how many techniques they've learned. But I think it is ultimately like the downfall of our portfolio to just have like, 100 images on one page. And I think for furniture, at least, understanding someone's digital skill sets are important. But doing excessive renderings, I would just discourage that. Like I mean, unless it's very much part of your practice, like we had a student who was working within the kind of context of like the metaverse and whatever. So there was a lot of digital work that was presented, which made sense. But I would just say that is a real, um, sorry, there's some kind of feedback. Do you all hear that, or is that just on my end? You hear
I
that?
can.
Okay. So anyway, I would say like limit the images and try to keep them really relevant to the product.
Yeah, I think I can build on that too. There's been a number of portfolios, I think, in the past couple of years. I don't know if you've also had this, Pete, but it sounds like you might, where some of the slides are taken up by research material or the background for a project. Where I would say that space is probably better used in showing me work, and then the process can be described with words or sort of understanding the context through which the photograph or the piece of work, the video, the book exists inside of, but that the actual research materials and your process through which you came or arrived at the work can be a component in writing rather than visualized. There's also this capacity and ability in SlideRoom. I don't know if this is still the case, Jen, but in previous years where you could use a PDF rather than an image. So I have seen portfolios where every image is a stack of images inside of a PDF, which is very, very both complicated for the panel of people reviewing to go through and feels a little unnecessary. We would be also much more excited about seeing, I think, to kind of reiterate what you said, Pete, how you put yourself together, how you put together your ideas inside of a confined space, inside of a confined set of the restriction of the portfolio is actually quite good in some ways.
Perfect, thank you. We do a lot of portfolio prep sessions at admissions, and we can't stress enough how much we say over and over again, no multi-page PDFs. We want to see 10 to 20 visual works. Part of the challenge for the portfolio is curating. So we don't need to see all of your work. We just need to see a selection of your work. And so many people, I understand you're applying to more than one grad school. You've got your work in a PDF already, and you just want to just quickly upload it and meet the requirement. SlideRoom will actually, you have to do a 10 slide minimum in SlideRoom in order to submit. And sometimes we've seen people who will submit the same multi-page PDF 10 times to meet that requirement. So just don't do that. Break up the PDF to meet at least the 10 slide minimum in SlideRoom. And as Lane and Pete mentioned, we don't need to see all of your work. We just need to see, a curated collection of what you've done. And then there's a question here, how many images is too many? So any thoughts on that?
40 images is too many. 21 images is kind of too many, or 24 would be too many. It really can be one image per page.
Perfect. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about this like, okay, there's potential, like I understand that for some of you, you want like a level of like efficiency, I think, so that the committee can really see all of the things. But yeah, I would say like 3 images per page would be like a maximum number from, yeah.
For us, I would say also a portfolio of 20 pages with 3 images would be
Oh.
a lot. The other sort of piece of that is that we want to be able to look at your work and focus on that rather than the design of the PDF.
Mm.
So the sort of graphic design nature that I think immediately becomes involved when you're thinking about how you create a page or put the rhythm of the images on the page is not what we want to be paying attention to. We're far more interested in the work itself. I mean, but of course, there's a number of different types of photography and types of installation that's very sculptural. So I'm not asking that you would like break up something like that. If the piece requires that the images be seen together at that moment in time, then that would be also an argument for using an installation image rather than potentially just the image itself, the image file, because that's 100% allowable and sometimes can be a really wonderful addition to see, especially if installation is a component of the work. How did you think about this being placed in space? Or how do you think about it existing inside of a gallery or exist inside of a museum?
Yeah, it's worth saying that like the ways that we are experiencing the work is, it's limited. Like we're scrolling and zooming in and having to move horizontally across a screen to really view the work. So when there's like, a lot of text on a page, on a PDF, like it becomes very difficult to actually read that and understand what else we're looking at. Um, yeah, and Lane, I totally agree. Like the graphic design of the PDFs, like I fully understand the desire um to want to kind of dive into that, but I really would just like de-emphasize the importance of it.
Perfect, thank you. All right. How detailed should someone be in the description section of their images? So SlideRoom does have a pretty lengthy, I think, word limit in the description section, so people can get pretty detailed. But what are you really looking for in that section?
Brevity, actually. Brevity, but it's like that good writing rule. If you can say it with less words too. Um, I love knowing how the image was made. So sort of the process that went through physically making the image or the piece of work, as well as a description of what is the work about, which could be about place, it could be about where you took the image, it could be about who the image is of, it could be about how that image relates to the others in a particular series. So don't feel like you need to take up the entire space of the description by any means. That's definitely not necessary for understanding the work unless you need to. But I would say for the most part, Jen, that would be, we don't need that much information. If that, I don't know if that clarifies what the person was asking though.
Definitely.
Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah, I would, very similar to furniture. I would say, brevity is key, understanding how you did something. Like if there's, kind of a simple way to describe a process, that could be helpful, depending, again, I mean, it so depends on what the material is like and what the scale is that you're working with. I would say scale is something that's helpful to include if you're not working one-to-one scale. And I might also, yeah, like for furniture, like including dimensions, materials, the kind of like overall tombstone information is important. If it's motivated by, um, if it's motivated by a certain type of style or archetype, that could be worth including. But honestly, brevity is useful here. It's a way for us to, you know, see the work and have a very brief description of like what we're looking at. I don't think we needed like a step by step of how it was made, but highlights are good to include.
You did just say something too that really resonated with me, which is that if there is a particular maker, photographer or otherwise that you are in conversation with, that's also really useful information because we might be visually seeing those similarities, but if you're really in conversation with a photographer or an artist, that can be really useful information as to why the image or why the piece of work that you're showing looks the way it does, or sort of how you're situating your own practice as a maker. Also, I will say one exception to this, and I think it's because it's very photography specific, is the videos of books or zines or those sort of flip throughs. Those can actually be very useful for us. And I know it can almost feel like a cheat, but it's like a convention inside of photography, those kind of videos of the books. But if that is a way that you work, which is book form, which is a kind of specific way of working, I think as a photographer, if you've already been thinking through sequencing like that, that is a way in which it can be really useful to see a larger example of how you sequence. If that makes sense.
Yeah, perfect. All right. This is a furniture specific question, Pete. This person organizes their work in collections, usually 6 pieces per collection, and they have around 5 collections. Is it stronger to present them as as a grouped bodies of work, or should they break them apart and show the pieces individually?
It sounds like you're very prolific, which is exciting. I think if you have 5 collections of work, and each includes 6 pieces, I would try to edit, is what I would honestly say. I would say, like, which collections or what is it about the collection that you're wanting to build on? Like, as you're thinking, again, just to like kind of bring us back to the context of graduate school and what this time is for. In furniture, we're working towards a thesis year, which is a highly self-directed, project that can be anything. I mean, truly, it's like we have students working across the board on projects. So, I would say if you look at the collections that you've created, which ones are most exciting to your current kind of research inquiry? Or modes of making, depending on what the work is. It also might be worthwhile to show different, like if you're choosing between five collections or multiple collections, like what are a few that show breadth in your work? Like, is it about, or some object scale or some lighting focused or some furniture focused? Like, I think that's up for you to decide, but I think, um, again, and I'm trying to think about this like, well, if a collection, for example, included like a floor lamp and a chair, and there's, obvious aesthetic, material, formal kind of relationships, those could sit on a page together potentially. But I'm not sure, it is limited space. So I would kind of work through this in an editorial way. You could easily do the whole portfolio requirement with one of those collections. It really depends, but I would say be editorial. Don't try and cram 30 pieces of furniture into this application.
Perfect. Right. Great. Lane, this is a photography question for you. This person works across photography, installation, and short video. For the RISD photo portfolio, do you prefer a focused body of work with images, plus documentation of installations and research, or a submission of single images or a single video? If mixed materials are welcome, how would you like us to balance finished images, install documentation, and research notes?
Super exciting. We so welcome people with mixed practices in the department. We recently also hired a wonderful artist named Nelson Chan, and then also myself, who are both photography and extended media professors. So that is a wonderful way to have. Um, we're so interested in practices that kind of bend outside of traditional photography or image making. In terms of the portfolio, I'd say if it's things that you want to work on as a graduate student, that is definitely something that we would love to see. If you're thinking about, or you're maybe curious about continuing your practice as a video maker or as an installation artist, that's very exciting for us to know, because it will let us know kind of where you want to focus your energies or where you might be thinking. That being said, of course, when you come to graduate school, often people start as one idea of themselves and one idea of what their practice will be. And by the end of the 2 years, it's a very different outcome. Uh, Balancing that with research images inside of the portfolio, I would say if you have enough work that you're excited about that feels resolved, I would focus mostly there and use the descriptions as the place to put the research, rather than focusing on research images or including them. But in terms of installation versus specific image files, if the installation of it gives me a greater understanding of the work, or a greater understanding of how you think about rhythm in space, and that is somehow central or a component of the work, then I would love to see the installation image. It's the portfolio for me is so much about wanting to know how you think, what you're interested in, and what you want to work on. Those are the exciting things, I think, to really showcase. And in terms of video work, that to me as well is often is very reliant on its installation as well. So that might be a really integral component of the video, or it might not be. It might be something that you expect to be shown, or it's not important how, or the methodology of how it is installed is not a component of the work right now. So in that case, I wouldn't necessarily need to see that you have it on a CRT versus a projector versus on two walls. Anything in there that I didn't get to?
I think you hit all the questions. There was a lot of questions in there.
Great
Perfect.
question.
Yeah.
Great question though.
You've both touched upon this already a little bit, but specifically, are you expecting to see recent work, or can it be both old and recent?
I would say I would say it so depends on your scenario. Like I think old work is fine, especially if you're coming back to it, like we talked about earlier, like if you're kind of switching career paths or you're kind of diving back into the field, and you're using old work as a jumping off point, saying like, I want to go back and explore or expand upon the ideas and the materials and making processes present, go for it. I would say, generally speaking, which there's always outliers, I would say generally speaking, understand if you have an active current practice, understanding what you are working on now and what's been kind of evolving out of your studio at this point or your studio practice at this point, is very helpful for us to understand how you want to take that work forward. But if old work is a good touch point, include it. And again, use the kind of space you have to describe like why. That's really what's, important.
I think for us too, it's more important though that old work is included in a way that's not biographical, and more intellectual. If the work that you have that's a bit older specifically relates to the newer work in a way that pushes forward an idea or shows me a progression in the way that you're working with material, um, concept. I think that's the kind of argument for including it rather than this is the first time I ever worked with this material. This is how I work with it now. Because that kind of progression might not be as interesting, or feels more like evidentiary than it does feel sort of more generative.
Great. Thank you. We get this question more often than you would think.
Mm.
Um, and I'm going to ask this in two ways. Is a link to a portfolio Google Drive with 12 individual professional pieces acceptable? And I'm going to say no.
Oh, I was going to say no, in part because it creates, you know, when a committee is reviewing applications, we're reviewing many applications. So when we leave that site and are all of a sudden in this like Google world, like there's a lot of examples, like this actually happened last at the last emission cycle. Um, Someone doesn't want to either like be accessing your drive from their email address, like those become like visible, but also it just creates like problems with kind of what you're including there. Like when you're not working around the parameters that have been given, you're already kind of you're asking the committee to like, accept a different set of criteria for you that are different for other candidates. Because what you include there it's whatever you decide to include. So I would say again, like even if it's not ideal, working within the parameters is really ideal.
Same answer.
By following the prompts in Slide Room and the instructions that we give you, it puts everybody on the same playing field. So when you're just trying to submit a link to your work, and again, thinking, you can wash your hands of the requirement, hit submit, and you're done with the application, you're not really putting in the effort of, being really thoughtful about that element of the application. Now, we do get people who ask questions if they can put a link to their work in the description section of Slide Room. What are your thoughts on that? If they, show one image of a larger project and then link out to where you can find more images on that. What are your thoughts on that?
That bothers me quite a lot less. I think if it is relevant or you feel like it relates, but you're kind of giving me the option to look farther, I would say that with the panel of people, we go through so many different rounds. I don't know if this is the same in your department, Pete, but we start with a very wide panel of people. We come together with, a smaller selection. It keeps winnowing down. So at a certain point, I would say we very frequently will look at your website or look at what other work might be out there. So that kind of invitation, I never really mind.
Yeah, same. I would just consider it, as Lane said, like it is an option. Like I wouldn't, you know, assume that the full committee will click on a link or that that will be the basis for a larger conversation around the applicant. So while I think it doesn't hurt if you have an image that's like, for more kind of information with a link. But generally speaking, it really would be kind of gamble as to whether somebody is actually going to follow through on that link. And it's not, I would just say, like, don't expect that somebody will do it. But I also agree it can be helpful.
I would
So
even say don't expect people will not. Expect that no one will go to it, so that let the portfolio speak on its own and imagine that it would be an invitation to look deeper, but it's just imagine we're not going to. So that nothing that is outside of the portfolio is integral to what you want us to see or think about.
That's great. That's the same exact guidance that we give in admissions too. So that's
Mhm.
reassuring. Perfect. Pete, this question's for furniture. Let's see here. This person does a lot of sketching and material notation alongside building process, and they find that it carries just as much of the idea as finished pieces. Is that something you like to see in slide room submission, or should it be edited down to make more space for completed work?
I would say the latter. I think that understanding one's process and seeing kind of glimpses of it is certainly useful. If it sounds like from this that it is, you know, part of the process that leads to the final kind of object. And I would say if that's the case, that yeah, maybe showing a glimpse of that, but not overly focusing on it is important. If it is, if it if it is shown alongside final work, which I can't fully gauge from this, like if it is important to understanding the final work or would be shown, for example, in a gallery or exhibition space alongside, then feel free to include it. But if it is really process focused, I would limit it. Is that helpful?
That is. Thank you, Pete.
Clarifying? Okay.
And Lane, back to you. This person works with story-based staged photography genre. For the writing accompanying the images, is the committee more interested in seeing a description of the project, the thought process, or the story of the image?
Mm.
Can you say more about the writing?
Yeah, I mean, in relationship to the practice that I am imagining in my head, all three of those types of writing seem integral potentially to the image, or would be very useful. If the story, once again, to Pete's comment or the way that Pete just answered that last question, if it's not something that is a part of the work, but instead your process to getting to the image might be something that you write or a narrative that you create that then you image, it might not be necessary to include it, or it might not be as useful as the description of how you made the image. But it sounds like it is a component of how you made the image, so that might be useful to include a bit of it as well.
All right. We now have 4 minutes left. We will be ending right at 11 a.m. But with this remaining time, I'd like to ask a more broader question to both of you to close out the session. Um, how do you feel, actually, in your experience, what distinguishes somebody who's ready for graduate study here at RISD?
From from my perspective, readiness is like a kind of complex question. Like on the one hand, readiness to explore a set of ideas that you feel really energized by, and also ready for a very deep dive into critically thinking about your work and why you do it, and also needing the time to make that happen. Um, that's what I would kind of say.
Yeah, I would as well. And I do hope that the structure of the portfolio helps also not only us, but you get to a space of really being able to articulate to yourself why you're ready for this program. But it's a very complicated answer. It also comes through in interviews. It comes through really honestly in all aspects of the portfolio, or it can.
Mhm. Perfect. Great. Well, thank you so much. I want to thank you both for being here today and answering these questions. There were some questions left in the Q&A that we're not going to be able to get to, but if you email me at admissions@risd.edu, I'm sure it's okay, Lane and Pete, if we direct these questions to you afterwards.
Completely.
I also want to do a plug. We will be doing an online open house in November where both photography and furniture will have a dedicated 1 hour session. That registration now is live on our website. If you Google admissions graduate events, you'll see the open house link and you'll be able to register there. But this conversation doesn't stop here. There's many more opportunities to learn more and prepare for the application before the January 5th deadline. Like I said, you're always welcome to email admissions@risd.edu, and we're happy to direct your questions along. But with that, I would like to thank everyone for being here. Thank you, Pete. Thank you, Lane, for providing your insight today. I know we're getting a lot of thank yous in the chat and the Q&A, so they really appreciate you being here. But with that, I just want to thank everybody, and I hope you have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jen,
Perfect. Have a great day.
for coming. Bye.